And this is what standard foundation is, that's 5.4. So the whole idea of using small cells is to get them back to natural size. It's not to try and make them some size they wouldn't be otherwise. If you're catching a natural swarm that's from wild bees, they're already going to be natural size. So they're going to build a natural size comb. But you buy a package of bees, they're going to be enlarged and they're going to build not as small a comb as those natural size bees are going to build. So the whole reason anybody's using small cell is to get them to that point, or if you're like me, you just want everything standard. You just want foundation and you want all the frames nice and standard. And then if you're going to use foundation, it should be the right size, right? But this is what you're saying, and I totally agree. I think we can assume that the bees know what natural cell size is, and if we let them, they'll answer that question. But the problem is that it may take a couple of turnovers of comb for them to answer that question, but I think they'll answer that question.
And they might die first.
And that's true, yeah. So that's kind of the crux of this. When I was not treating bees and they were on large cell, they all died from varroa. I mean, all of them. And you look on the bottom board and there'd be tens of thousands of dead varroa and tens of thousands of dead bees. And all of them died. I know there's people out there saying you can keep bees on large cell and not treat them. But I don't know anybody who's doing that who isn't struggling with varroa. And I know a lot of people who are on small cell or natural cell who aren't struggling with varroa. I really don't know anybody though who's on large cell who isn't struggling with varroa. So to me it was the tipping point when I went to small cell. I tried all these genetics. And none of them really helped. They all still died. The other thing you look for to see if varroa is what killed your bees is if you look at the brood cells, varroa will leave these little white specks, which is their feces. And you can tell if there's a lot of that, then they probably had a lot of varroa. I really haven't seen any losses due to varroa in years, in more than a decade. What I see is occasionally I lose some of the winter, but I have really nasty winters, and I think the varroa probably aren't helping them getting through the winter, I'm sure. But I think there's other issues. I think the harder thing about getting them through the winter now is nutrition, because all of these cornfields around me fill every last weed in the field with Roundup now because of the Roundup Ready corn and the Roundup Ready soybeans. And I think they'll everything that's in the ditches with 2,4-D because they don't want that to spread to their cornfield. And so they're wiping out the entire food supply of the bees, and then they don't know why the bees are having problems. But I think genetics is important to this, but I don't think it's necessarily the tipping point for varroa. It might help with varroa, I don't know. It definitely helps with survival, to get good genetics. That's the Severide's law. But this is typical foundation. This is, I'm starting at the 10 and measuring to the 15.4 here, because the end of this ruler you can't see the mark clearly. So that's 10 cells, it's 5.4. This is standard Dadant wax foundation. This is right cell, 5.4. This is Purco, it's 5.2. This is a Purco deep frame, it's 5.25. This is a Purco medium sheet, and it's 5.2. I think a Purco medium frame is like 5.3. I don't know, I don't have one in here, but here's small cell. This is 4.9. So the 5.4 was over 1, 2, 3 over here. We're down to here. This is a Manlake TF 100s, TF 120s, and they're 4.94. And this is just a package of bees I dumped in the top bar hive, and they drew 4.7. Now, why would smaller cells help? Well, this is a study. I have the link out there on my. You go load this up on my website. You can copy that link and paste it, and it'll give you a study on male survivorship. But basically, the end result is that on a smaller cell, the male gets on the wrong side of the cocoon when the larva is spinning its cocoon to turn into a pupa. Quite often anyway, but at least sometimes, the male gets stuck on the other side of that cocoon when the cell's smaller, and it almost never happens when the cell's larger. My observation on pupation time is they get capped on day 8 and they emerge on day 19 when you're doing small cell. They get capped on day 9 and emerge on day 21 when you're doing large cell. So this is a study it models the capping and post-capping times and how much it would decrease Varroa. And basically they're saying if you shorten the pre-capping time by 8 hours and the post-capping time by 8 hours, you'd solve all your Varroa problems. But that's a study on that topic. And my observation is they actually get capped a good 24 hours shorter, and after they're capped, they're 24 hours shorter post-capping time. So that's a lot more than 8 hours. So 8 hours shorter capping time has the number of Varroa that get into the brood cell, and then 8 hours shorter post-capping time has the number of offsprings that the Varroa actually has. And that's another study on small cell. So this is the accepted norm. In all your books, it'll say they get capped on day 9, they emerge on day 21. That's what it'll say. And that's on large cell. But Jan Zerzan, who is the second most amazing bee researcher probably in history, he's the guy who figured out parthenogenesis. He figured out that unfertilized eggs became drones and fertilized eggs became workers and queens, and worked all that out along with a lot of stuff that Huber had figured out, but he didn't know that. But, Jan Zerzan says it's 19 days. And he's doing this on natural comb back in the mid-1800s. And he says it's 19 days. And he's one of those scientists who you can pretty much trust everything he comes up with, and he comes up with 19 days. Huber comes up with basically 20 days. They used to come up with 18 and a half, but there's a mistake in 3 of the English translations of his work. It says 6 right here. And I went back and found the original French, both the original first volume 1 that got published by itself, and then the volume 1 and 2 that got published after that, and both of them use the word sept, jours, and demi, which is 7.5. And that comes to 20, so otherwise it'd be 18 and a half. So my observation is it gets capped 18 days after it's laid and emerges 19 days, which is the same as the Zerzan's. I first noticed this, I wasn't expecting this. I just bought an observation hive and put the observation hive in my living room, and I'm just having fun, watching them and the queens laying eggs, and I thought, they've always told me how many days it is till this, how many days it is till that, so I got a crayon and marked A where the queen just laid there, put it in my notebook A and the date and the time, and I did that for B, C, D, did about 10 of them, and then I came back in a few days and kept looking at it every day. I'd get up and look at it, and when they got capped, I put down when they got capped, and they got capped about a day early, and that kind of surprised me. It wasn't too big a deal, so I kept going, and then they all emerged on day 19, and I was stunned, so I posted it on BeeSource to Dee, who used to be on BeeSource at the time, and I said, I don't get this. I'm watching these bees on small cell on my observation hive, and we got capped on day 8 and they emerged on day 19. Does that have something to do with cell size, or is there something else involved here? And she says, oh yeah, they get capped a day earlier and they emerge a day earlier.
Michael?
Yeah.
I'm going to pull up the paper on the raising with earlier development time. Is this a worker or this queen you're talking about?
I'm talking about workers, yeah. I'm just talking about workers right now.
Yeah, because were the queens that come out earlier,
Right.
the workers follow with the same,
I think that's probably true too. If genetically, if you're looking for queens that emerge earlier, you'll probably get. The problem with queen measuring how early the queens emerge, though, is it depends a lot on the weather that week.
that and the temperature.
Yes, so if it's hot days, they're almost always early, and if it's cold days, sometimes it's late. But I think you're right. I think if you genetically chose for queens that emerged early, you probably get bees that emerged early, but I don't know. Yeah.
So Michael, how did bees get larger in the first place? Is it like Apistan and stuff like that that makes them larger?
It's the foundation.
It's the foundation?
Right.
So it has nothing to do with any of the treatments?
No, it's the foundation. This all started with Huber, really. Huber noticed that when you had laying workers or you had a drone-laying queen, you got drones that were raised in worker cells. They were tiny compared to the drones that were raised in drone cells. So he said, well, the cell size seems to have an effect on the size of the bee. So what would happen if you raised bees in larger cells? Well, he didn't have any foundation, so he tried to get the bees to raise workers in drone cells, and they just refused to do it. And it never really, it was kind of a experiment that didn't really work out. And then when foundation was invented, Badeau readdressed this question and said, well, maybe we can make something that's small enough that they raise workers in it, but it's bigger than what a normal worker cell is, and we can get bigger bees. And so he did, and he got bigger bees. And so he started cheating it up, and he got up to about 5.7 in his research that he's tracking, but he could still get the queen to lay eggs in it if he had upsized the bees enough by then. He could get the queen to lay eggs in 5.7, which is huge compared to 4.9. He studied all the way from 4.7, which I assume is what he was considering to be natural size, because he wasn't interested in making them smaller. He was only interested in making them bigger. And his charts and stuff started about 4.7 and went up to 5.7 of all his research on enlarging them. Well, then that caught on with the industry. The industry decided, well, a bigger bee must be able to haul more honey, so therefore they'd be more productive, so let's make them bigger. They argued about it in the magazines for a while, but eventually the industry just started making the foundation bigger, and that's the way. And that's why we have large bees, because the industry enlarged the foundation. Does that make sense? This is Badeau's research on the dimensions of the cells and the volume of the cell. At 5.555, it was 301 cubic millimeters of volume. At 4.7, it was 192. This is the difference side by side. Those are 5.4s and these are 4.9s. You can see there's a pretty noticeable difference there too. Now, if you're trying to get them to draw a natural cell, you're just letting them build what they want. These are the things that affect the size they draw. Obviously, if they want to draw a drone brood, it's going to be bigger. And worker brood is going to be smaller. But honey storage is often bigger than what they're building when they know they're building worker cells. So if you're trying to get them to draw a small cell in the middle of a heavy flow, it's pretty impossible because they're not thinking in terms of building more brood comb. They're thinking in terms of building someplace to store all the honey. And they'll tend to build it bigger. The other thing is the size of the bees drawing the comb. The bigger the bee is, they're measuring things by their body, and so they tend to build bigger cells because they are bigger. Spacing of the top bars, I think, affects their perception of what it is they're building. If they think they're building honeycomb, then they tend to space the combs wider, and every bee is picking up where the last bee left off. This is part of what's interesting and confusing about bees, is when they're building comb, it's not that there's one architect in there going, okay, guys, this is what we're building. It's going to be, this long. It's going to be this wide. We're going to space it this far from this other comb. There's just a bunch of bees clustered up here, and this one bee goes up and slaps a chunk of wax up there and wanders off, and another bee walks up and slaps another chunk of wax on there and wanders off, and another bee goes up and chews on all those for a while and shapes them a little bit and wanders off, and another bee goes up and sticks another piece of wax on there and chews on it a little bit, and then they wander off, and so it's like every bee walks up and looks at this and goes, what are we building? Oh, I think these must be worker cells because of the distance to that comb and the distance to that comb. and the size it looks like they were starting to build. And so they try and pick up where the last bee left off to finish the work. So they don't have a, they can't go look at the blueprint and say, okay, what is it we're building here? They have to look at the spacing, the size, and go, okay, what are we building here? And then that combined with their own instincts of what they think they need. They may have a need that they think they need to build drone comb, and they're looking at this going, why are these idiots building worker comb? We need some drone comb. I'm going to rework this, and they'll start reworking it. But that's how they're making their decisions. So changing the spacing of the bars of this on center here can change their perception of what it is they're building. So this idea of regression is that you've got large bees, and they tend to build bees based on their body size. And you've got to try and get them back down to natural size bees before you're going to get natural size comb. That's the concept. So basically, regression is all about turnovers of comb. It's not about turnovers of bees. If you put a bunch of bees on 5.4 and you let them just keep raising bees, they will eventually get small. In about 20 years, the cocoons will build up enough that they'll probably be down to about 4.9. Of course, they will die to varroa about 19 years before that. But they will eventually get smaller because the cocoons, because their instinct is to have a certain size, and then once it gets below that threshold, then they'll chew them back out and they'll keep them that size. So Grout did the work on the chewing out part, and he pretty much proved that this theory that the cells will continue to shrink forever wasn't true. They'd only shrink to some threshold, and then the bees will chew them out. But the problem is, if you start at 5.4, that threshold is a long ways from 5.4 before they start chewing them back out. So to regress then, it's a question of turnovers of comb. So no matter how many turnovers of bees you've got, it's only shrinking by the thickness of a cocoon every generation. But if you take them off of this comb and let them build new comb, those smaller bees that were raised on that in-between size comb are going to build smaller comb again until you finally get back to natural size. So that's what regression is. One of the things about natural comb, though, is it's not all one size. It's, if you're trying to regress them to a natural comb, I would measure what's in the core of the brood nest, because what's out on the outside edges usually gets filled with honey, pollen, whatever. What really matters is what's in the core of the brood nest. I don't worry about what's on the outside edges. Even if they might expand all the way to the two outside frames here, they'll only do that briefly in the spring, and then they'll be back down to less brood after that, because there's this explosive buildup in the spring, and then there's kind of drop off a little in the summer, but keep raising some brood, and then if there's a drought, they might drop off to not raising any brood, and then so it kind of expands and contracts. But the core of that brood nest is what really matters as far as varroa, in my experience. So we kind of talked about this question before, and there isn't an exact answer, but basically the first generation of bees, if you just took a package of bees and let them build what they want, maybe 5.1, maybe 5.2, but probably somewhere in that ballpark if they were on 5.4. The next generation might build as small as 4.9, might still be built as big as 5.1, might be 5.0. It might take you another turnover before that. I have better luck if the frames are closer together, because I think they perceive that as worker comb as opposed to drone comb, as opposed to honey storage, where honey storage is like 1.5 inches or more, and drone comb is usually about 1 3/8 inches, and worker comb is usually about 1 1/4 inches. So I think that has an effect on their perception of what they're building. It's consistent with what Huber said. He said that they were 1 1/4 inches. It's inconsistent with what Zerzan says. He thinks they're 1.5 inches. But ask 2 beekeepers, you'll definitely get 3 answers. So. This is the width of the comb. This isn't the spacing of the comb. This is just the thickness of the comb itself at these various cell sizes. So at 5.555, the thickness of the comb was 22.60 millimeters, and then if you add a bee space in there, you're at about 1 3/8 inches, and which is 35 millimeters. If you get down to 4.7, the thickness of the comb is 20.20. That's 2.4 millimeters skinnier this way, and so not only is the comb itself skinnier, but the space between it tends to be a little skinnier. So that ends up being about 32 millimeter spacing, or an inch and a quarter.
What effect does that have on how they, work, the temperature regulation? Any?
Oh, it has a lot, yeah, because they can cover more brood if they don't have a big gap in there. A lot of people talked about that back when Hoffman, who invented the spacers you've got on the frames now, he went with 1 3/8, and Daydan at the time was largely in favor of 1.5 inches. And Hoffman's argument was 1.5 inches just made too much space. They couldn't cover as much brood. They couldn't keep the brood warm in the spring. It took more bees to keep the brood warm because of that extra gap. And that's been discussed for 100 years. So at 1.25 inches, yes, they cover a whole lot more brood, because now we're talking about just two bees passing each other in here. So you can have one layer of bees on this comb, one layer of bees on this comb, keeping this brood warm. You make it wider, now you got to put another layer of bees in between there. You make it a little wider, now you got to put another layer of bees in between there in order to keep it warm. So, yeah.
I believe you mentioned a while back that you were looking for someone to build 1 1/4 foundation.
Frames.
Frames.
Yeah.
Did you ever find anyone?
I found somebody
Successful?
who made me some, but I'm still trying to find somebody who will mass produce them and sell them. But no, I haven't. I suppose I should just buy the equipment and make them, but who has the time to do that? And I don't know if there's any money in it.
A cheap planer works pretty well.
Yeah, I usually just plane them down. You take a hand planer and you get it adjusted just right, and it only takes about 2 swipes, and on each side you've taken it from 1 3/8. You're only taking a 16th off of each side of the end bar, and if you get it adjusted where you're taking about a 32nd on a swipe with your planer, you just go about 2 swipes on each side and you're done. The other thing you could do is set up a table saw, set it, whatever. There's several ways you can do it. I don't know.
Michael, when you do that with a 1 3/8 inch, you reduce the space between the top bars.
You do.
And often the top bars that you buy with standard frames are too fat, so you've narrowed that to the point where drones.
You're down to 3/16 of an inch there, but a bee can still get through it. But yes, it's a little less than a bee space. But it's too much work to cut it off the top bars, so I don't.
So if somebody were to do sidebars,
Oh,
ideally properly spaced top
ideally,
bar.
what I'd like, yes, is a frame of the whole thing the dimensions of everything in this direction have been reduced by the same amount.
Everything's to scale.
That would be ideal, because then you'd have the exact bee space between the top bars, and you'd have.
That's how I cut mine, but boy, that's a lot of work to do it
Exactly.
one at a time.
Exactly. That's why I've never done that.
Yeah.
I contemplated it and said, no, I don't have time for that. Where the in bars don't take long, it's pretty quick, but, this is some bees that looked into a feeder, a top feeder, and I cut the comb out eventually, and, I was measuring this was all brood. It was a brood nest. They moved in there, those brood nests for reasons I don't know. But anyway, this is 30 millimeters here. Most of this is 32, but my point is that sometimes it gets as small as 30, and sometimes if they're building some drones somewhere out there, it might get as large as 35, but typically it's 32. But I have people argue with me that that's not what they make, so I have a picture here to prove it. But you see what I'm saying about the perceived intent? When a bee gets up here to work on this comb, they look and they go, what is it we're building? What is the purpose for this comb? And they're looking at the spacing between that and the other combs, and they're looking at what the other bee started. They're looking at all these things to make their decisions on what to build. Anyway, I'd say natural comb varies a lot. I've seen it as small as 4.6. I've seen it large as 5.1 even after they're kind of regressed. But I don't really see a lot of 5.4 worker cells. You might see some 5.4 around the corners where they're storing some honey, but you don't typically see that in the core of the brood nest. I don't know, we already kind of talked about all this. But what I've done to get natural comb to measure all that is I've done top bar hives, I've done foundational springs, I used to do blank starter strips, I kind of gave up on that. It works fine, except if you get a hot day, they might fall out of the groove, and it's just kind of a mess. If I glue some wood in there, it never falls out, so I've kind of gone to just doing foundational springs, either with a strip of wood or a bevel on the bar for a guide. The ways you get small cells, you can use the 4-9 wax. You can get honey Supercell. It's fully drawn. It gets a little complicated saying what it is, because what will happen is you'll buy some honey Supercell, you'll lay a ruler across 10 cells, and you go, well, this is 5.4. Well, yeah, but in normal foundation, the bees are building the cell wall. And the cell wall is about 0.01 millimeters, which is almost non-existent. It's negligible. Honey Supercell is plastic walls, and the plastic walls are much thicker than that. They're more like 0.5 millimeters per wall. So when you measure across 10 cells, which is your normal field method of the bees through the comb, and I'm going to measure what the cell size is, that doesn't work when the cell walls are 5 times as thick. More than 5 times as thick, almost 10 times as thick or more. So you've got to measure the inside of the cell and then add the 0.01, and then you're probably somewhere in the realm of it. The other thing that's confusing about fully drawn is it's always bigger at the top than the bottom, because in order to get the mold off, all these pegs that make the insides of the cell have to come out. And if it's a straight line, they just won't come out. But if it's tapered, then they can get to pop out. So it might be 5.0 at the mouth and 4.8 at the base, and it's tapered, but it averages out to 4.9. So basically, the honey Supercell averages out to 4.9. It's already fully drawn. The bees can't change it. It's there. It's fairly permanent. It'll last forever. But the bees don't really like it much. They hesitate to use it. It takes you about 2 weeks to get them to accept it. And then, so you're about 2 weeks behind what you would have been if you gave them the TF 100s and let them just build it. And the TF 100s then are plastic frames with the foundation built into them, and they're small. They're small to start with. They tend to build them the size they are.
And the TF 120, what's the difference between that, the 120 and the 100?
The 120 is for a 6 5/8 inch box, and the 100 is for a 9 5/8 inch box. So it just depends on the size of your box. And really, it's tempting to just call it the 100 series, because they'll make a 105 that maybe is black, and a 109 that's some other, that's green. I don't know. They make different colors and whatever, but Man Lake makes 2 basic series of these frames. They make a 500 series, and they're all 5.4, and you don't want those if you want small cell. And then they make the 100 series, and it's all 4.94. So you want the 100 series, don't get the 500 series. That's just a bevel on there. I don't know if you can tell if that's a bee, but that's a bee on the top bar there. I've got a list of small cell steadies if you want to go to this site. If you find any of these broken, let me know, because they seem to get broken now and then, and I have to go fix them and find them again. Sometimes I can find them again, sometimes I can't find them again. Sometimes they move them to a different server, or the server has reorganized their steadies and now it's a different link to get to it, or whatever. So anyway, if you're going to these and you find one broken, let me know. I'll try and track it down and fix it. But it's hard for me to keep up with all of them. There's too many of them. But these are all positive small cell steadies. If you want to go look at them. These are the negative small cell studies that are out there that conclude they didn't think it worked. Let's talk a little bit about the studies. My favorite quote on this topic I just read in A Stranger in a Strange Land, for those of you who are Robert Heinlein fans. Michael Valentine Smith says, "You cannot crop the desert by counting the grains of sand." And I think that's a perfect analogy to trying to understand Varroa by just counting Varroa. Counting Varroa is not the be-all, end-all of Varroa research. But pretty much that's what they do. They just do a short-term study and they count Varroa. They never let it get critical, they never let it become a problem, they never let the bees actually start to deal with it. And if you want to read some discussions on those negative small cell studies, there's some links there that take to some discussions on that. This is a peer-reviewed study that proved that most peer-reviewed studies are wrong. And I thought that was a pretty important discovery, actually. I don't know why it isn't more widely disseminated, but apparently the people who do peer-reviewed studies don't really want that to get out. I don't know. This is the summary of that study that that most peer-reviewed studies are wrong. I'm not going to read through it, but you can read it later. It's interesting, I quoted this the other day on, somebody was accusing me of being contradictory because I quoted the numbers on the Bee Informed survey, that basically the losses, if you take the last 2 years and average them out, the losses from people who are treating and people who are not treating are almost the same. I mean, 2 years ago, the people who were not treating lost less bees, and last year they lost a few more bees, but all in all, they weren't that significantly different either one of those years. Pretty much, people who are treating are losing bees. People who are not treating are losing bees. Now, they're only distinguishing this on they're treating or they're not treating. This is including all the beginners who just bought a package, threw it in there, didn't treat, and they died, and they don't know anything else about what they're doing, or didn't put them on small cell, didn't do anything else. Now, they also they did a small cell and large cell. They had people on small cell and what their losses were, and people on large cell and what their losses were. And you know what the difference was? There's no difference. Now, they would say, see, there's no difference. I would say, well, there's a lot of people in that large cell who aren't treating, and all those people on small cell are not treating, and they came up with the same results. So, I don't know. I'm not sure what that means because you just don't have enough other data to put in here, but the fact is it doesn't seem to be that much difference. The reality is if you're going to keep bees, you're going to lose bees sometimes. Whether you treat them or whether you don't treat them. The question is, which ones do you want to lose? Do you want to lose the wimpy ones that have to be propped up with chemicals and keep the ones that are strong enough to survive? Or do you want to prop them all up with chemicals and you don't know which ones you're keeping, but you're keeping the same number alive anyway?
And besides, do you want to use chemicals?
What's that?
And besides, do you want to use chemicals?
Well, yeah. That's the part I don't understand about if I'm going to get about the same results anyway, then why do I want to use the chemicals? I don't know. Of course, his argument is, I think he's thinking I'm being contradictory because I'm saying there's really no difference between treating and not treating in small cell and large cell. No, I'm saying the BIP survey showed that with no other things taken into account. And there are other things you need to take into account. There are other things I'm doing besides just small cell. I've been keeping bees for 42 years. I kind of have an idea how to manage them, and how well you manage them has a lot to do with whether they survive. So there are other aspects to beekeeping besides treating, not treating small cell and large cell. But he was accusing me of contradicting myself somehow. I couldn't figure out where he thought the contradiction was, but this was a quote I put on from Blaise Pascal. Contradiction is not a sign of falsity, nor a lack of contradiction a sign of truth. And then, I don't remember, he went off on something about who this weird guy